Tantra is one of those areas of investigation that's just eluded me for a very long time, and understanding a little bit more about it has really made a big difference to my Western practice. I didn't expect it to change my views of what I was actually doing quite as much as it did, and it's been so helpful to just to see what might be considered the origins of some of the aspects of the Western practice being elucidated. A few years ago, when I was just discovering the Western tradition, I visited Watkins Books in London, and they pointed me to this book over here, Agora, At the Left Hand of God by Robert Svaboda. And I completely agree, it's a wonderful book. I might disagree with the idea that it's a good place to start. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book several years later when I remembered the title and eventually picked it up. It's got this wonderful preface, which is only a few pages long, which gives a really nice introduction to Tantra, an introduction to what the word in fact means. It's very different from what many people understand as just being a sexual practice, a way of prolonging sexual gratification and things like this. Sex has a place in Tantra, although one might argue that it's a very, very small place under a very particular situation, and certainly it won't be every tantric practitioner who will ever even encounter that particular practice. So that kind of intrigued me, and that's when I started kind of growing my tantric library, right? A fantastic book, a really fun read actually, but yeah, not necessarily the first book to read if you're starting to investigate magic altogether. Everything came together for me when I finally picked this volume up, Tantra Illuminated by Christopher D. Wallace. I mean, it's an extraordinary book from beginning to end, extremely well explained. Everything is so clear. The guy is clearly a teacher, and it comes through very clearly. He's also clearly a practitioner, not only a practitioner, but also a scholar. So he knows his subject inside and out, and he knows it, from the inside, which is not something that many scholars can actually offer. So, extraordinary book. But I wanted to especially draw your attention to this list on page 33, where he describes the aspects of a practice which might make it tantric. So I'll just go through this list and pay close attention and see how familiar this sounds to you if you are a practitioner of Western magic. So it starts: an alternative path, new revelation, more rapid path, centrality of ritual, especially evocation and worship of deities, proliferation in the number and types of deities compared to the antecedent or preceding tradition, visualization and self-identification with the deity. The bornless or headless ritual comes to mind here. Centrality of mantras. A mantra is a spoken or vibrated sentence or word which is supposed to trigger some kind of synchronization with deity or divinity. Installation of mantras on specific points of the body. Ontological identity of mantras and deities. So the mantras and deities have their specific functions. Necessity of initiation and importance of esotericism. Secrecy. Yoga, usually referring to meditation and visualization practices. It suddenly becomes apparent why Dion Fortune called the Kabbalah the Western Yoga. Ritual use of mandalas and yantras, especially in initiation. A yantra is an object or a picture or a design which is used for meditation, and again which is supposed to trigger some synchronization with deity or divinity. Spiritual physiology, i.e. subtle body and chakras, and kundalini, which makes me immediately think about the middle pillar ritual, right? Mapping deities and pilgrimage sites onto the practitioner's body. Linguistic mysticism, importance of the teacher, addition of worldly aims achieved through largely magical means. So one of the things that differentiates the magical path from the mystic path is precisely the fact that the magical path doesn't shun worldly comfort and achievement. Lay householder practitioners dominate the tradition rather than the ascetics. So it's a practice for the people, not a practice for priests. Bipolar symbology of God-Goddess. So we have those two sides to the tree of life, the pillar of mercy and the pillar of severity. Non-dualism. Revaluation of the body. Revaluation of negative mental states. So we have shadow work here. Importance of Shakti, power, energy, goddess, the divine feminine. Revaluation of the status and role of women. In fact, I think that one of the reasons why the Golden Dawn was so shocking at the time was that precisely it accepted women amongst its members. Transgressive antinomian acts. So this is where taboos are broken in order to deconstruct the practitioner's worldview. Utilization of sexual yogas. I'm sure many of you know about the thelemic Gnostic Mass. The cultivation of bliss, spontaneity. Special types of meditation that aim to transform the individual into an embodiment of the divine after a short span of time. That's exactly the aim of the LBRP. The last 10 features really only apply to the non-dualist or left current Tantra. And once again, these last 10 absolutely apply to the left-hand path in the Western tradition. So those are the characteristics that define a tantric practice. And they've clearly been very useful because they've been adopted throughout the world. First of all, in Buddhism. So Tibetan Buddhism is precisely Buddhism with tantric aspects, Buddhism with yantras and mantras. Here's a really lovely book of yantras, which I reviewed previously. You can check that review down in the comments. I'll leave a link naturally. But not only that, we have, for example, chud. I'm not sure if that's the proper pronunciation of it, but this is a Buddhist practice that, amongst other things, involves eating meat in a cemetery in order to embrace one's own mortality. So this is an entire series on Tibetan tantric practices. There are only 3 books in publication so far, with a new book coming out every 6 months to a year. I think the next one's coming out in November. And you can see that with volumes 13, 14 and 18 only existing for the moment, they're not really being published in any particular order. But all that to say that Buddhism incorporated Tantra into its own philosophy and into its own tradition and mythology as well. It makes sense because Tantra is an Indian practice, and therefore it assumes that the practitioner has all the Indian background assumptions. For example, that the color white represents death, which of course is not at all the case in the West, right? We have black representing death. And this is why we have certain books which have an aim to introduce the Eastern techniques and maps for a Western mind. These 2 books are highly recommended, both by Anodea Judith, who has spent quite a lot of time studying the Eastern maps of the esoteric body and mapping that to a Western worldview. It's obviously very important to use the Western assumptions and the Western way of understanding the universe if you're introducing this practice to a Western public. And that's why books such as The Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley's Magic, book 4 over there, take all of these Indian tantric concepts and make them available to a Western mind with an Abrahamic background, but also bringing in all kinds of other deities and spirits and so on from the non-Abrahamic Western traditions, Greek and Egyptian and so on and so forth. So I'll just conclude over here with a few more books on Tantra that I have over here. So these are books on, again, the left-hand path of Tantra. These are books by the publishing company called The Fall of Man. They're not particularly beautiful, or they clearly aspire to being beautiful. You know that I care very much about the construction of books because I think of books as yantras, right? Talismanic objects that help one to synchronize oneself with divinity. However, the information included is very clear, very interesting, and aimed at the practitioner of a Kali-focused practice. Right. The second book is mainly about the actual rituals that might be used. Sticking with another left-hand path Tantra book, this is the one by Craig Williams, published by Anathema Publishing. And this one's in two parts. The first part is quite old. Dr. Williams was quite young, clearly, when he was writing this, and nowhere near as accomplished a writer as he is today. I can strongly recommend the second half of this book, where his description of a Krishna-centered Tantra is very beautifully described and illustrated, and he offers a number of practices which might be useful for the budding left-hand path tantrist. Agora, I've told you about this one already. It's actually the memoir of Svaboda's guru, written out by Stephen Svaboda, and it's written from the point of view of the guru. So I've told you about the preface already, which gives a really nice introduction to Tantra. But I really like this introduction where he says that Vimalananda, his guru, would usually exaggerate many aspects of any given story, so that one must bear that in mind when reading the book. It's written as a series of stories and experiences, some of which are fascinating, some of which are frankly difficult to believe. And it's quite funny, every time he finishes such a point, he says things like, "You don't have to believe me, I don't care." Makes no difference to me. Then we've got Awakening Shakti by Sally Kempton, one of my favourite authors. She's the author of Meditation for the Love of It. And she's written this book specifically on the figure of Shakti, so the female aspect of the universe, the goddess of yoga, she calls her. Lots and lots of meditations going on in here. A really, really beautiful, practical book written by someone who really knows what she's talking about. There's no airy-fairy nonsense here. She is also a left-hand practitioner, and she fully understands the need for both sides of the coin. Also, if you like audiobooks, this is available as an audiobook, though it's not read by Sally Kempton. I found the voice of the narrator a little grating. However, there is another audiobook, not with the full text, but only with the meditations as guided meditation, which is read by Sally Kempton, and is absolutely wonderful. And finally, to round out my collection of Tantra-focused books, here is Ferocious, a folk tantric manual on the Sapta Matrika cult. And this is published by Theon Publishing, and it focuses on 8 different Matrika female deities who are all quite terrifying, but who promise both worldly achievement and also enlightenment, and a break away from the cycle of reincarnation. And that, I think, is probably one of the central points of what a tantric practice should actually be. It's a practice that does not shun the physical world, recognizes that we have to live in this physical world, in fact thinks of this world as being a part of divinity itself, but never loses sight of the greater goal of enlightenment and uniting with divinity. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found the video at least a little useful. There is in fact another book on Tantra on my shelves, and that's Kali Kaula by Jan Fries. I'm afraid I haven't opened that one yet. I did want to mention it though, because Jan Fries is one of the best esoteric scholars currently writing, and his broad range of expertise is always offered up to the reader in a really engaging, readable form. So if you're curious about the Kali-focused Tantra, that's probably going to be the book for you. Special thanks as always go out to all my dear members. Thank you so much for your generous support. If you're interested in finding out more about membership and how they get to access the Foolish Fish Discord, where they get to chat and swap magical tips and tricks with other like-minded people, you can click on the join button just next to the subscribe button down below, or clicking the link in the description. Thanks in particular to my level 3 members, the Magister Venerabilis members, this week being Frater VPF, JP Ferraccio, Aristarchus, Silk Weaver, Will C, Distorted Waves, Living Ritual, Inger Urias, L West, Jason, Byron Marmol, Lucky Boots, H Happy, SMQAI, Michael Dunn, Alessio Di Gino, Raone, Judy Hounson, Yusuf Saber, Frater Demianus, L Harper, Connor Smith, Christopher Kunchik, B, Replicator 44, Tara Nicholson, Ricardo Colomé, Raskill YO, Oskule Intin, Amanda Mayer, Ferion 1, Justin Lloyd, King Rainbow, Eleonora F, Jorge Salas, Luis Mancilia, Ian Smith, Osvaldo Gonzalez Nunez, Fernando Martin del Campo, Robert Mahoney, Alvin A, VX, Frater D Lane, A Million Ways to Wipe, Alexander Carval, Sheridan, Not Sure, Andrew Kudlak, Mateusz Sadowski, Mrs. CY, Medusa of Chaos, Seidr, Matu, Merrily Duffy, Metagordy, Damnatio Memoriae, Suncat, Ted Kaiser, J. Joseph Safi, Kyle Walker, Roluch Ashron, Charbon, Patrick, Arcantum by Mr. Friborg, The Jade Ghost, Timothy Owens, and Z. Daniel Barnett. Thank you all so much for your support. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to click the like button and to subscribe down below if you haven't done so already. See you soon with another video. Bye-bye.